So, we're going to be slide free, which as a recovering management consultant is difficult for me too. So, in terms of what we're going to do today, it's going to be four primary things. So first, we're going to talk a little bit, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about me, so you have a context. Messy handwriting is a sign of intelligence, just so we're clear. Then I'm going to tell you about the Marsh story and what we did with social media and social transformation there, which I think was pretty interesting. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what I see as some of the biggest pitfalls in what I would say is enterprise social. And then the real kind of dynamic part that I think is going to be the most interesting is we'll have a social strategy workshop. And I'm going to show you a 5-part model. And on this one, together we're actually going to work. And so whether some of you have networks deployed, some of you are planning to, some of you might be considering it, some of you might be practitioners or consultants and analysts helping others, wherever you're at in that journey, I think the model will be flexible enough to think about how you can either up the game, start the game, up the game, help your client, change the game, etc. So that I realize there's a lot of intelligence in the room. So what we want to do is leverage that in a very kind of fast-paced conversation. So a little bit about me. I've worked in HR and communications the last 5 years, and I was at Marsh & McLennan Companies. Marsh is the largest insurance broker in the world, and I was at their sister company, Oliver Wyman, as a management consultant. I've worked in the defense industry. I've worked with car rental companies. I worked a lot in aviation and aerospace, and then insurance brokerage. And then now I'm working with a whole variety of clients as I build out my practice here in New York. Everything from architecture, interior design, tech startups, period artists, all sorts of different things. So I am always stimulated by learning about new industries and in kind of commerce in general. In fact, when I was a kid, I kind of knew I was going to be a business person. I didn't exactly know what that was going to be. My first desired career was to be a game show host, believe it or not. And that was, I like Bob Barker or like Pat Sajak, those were like my guys. Like that's what I really thought I could do well. So yeah, close. Okay, so we'll have a little Plinko or the Showcase Showdown. Yeah, have your pet spayed or neutered. So we were. So I thought about that, and then my mom brought up, years later that I had an invoice book, right? Like write the triplicate invoices, and I was 7. And I wrote one to my sister for borrowing my toys with payment terms and everything else like that. So we still have a copy of that, so I should surface that one of these days. But I think, I've actually a degree in marketing and leadership studies, and when I think about social and social transformation, although I understand a great deal about technology, when I was at Lockheed Martin, I helped, with some teams that build a lot of software, I don't really think of it as technology. I really, in fact, that's a big turnoff to me when the first question is, well, what platform are you on, or which tool are you using, or which whatever, because honestly, it doesn't matter. I mean, you want to have good technology, but whatever you have is outdated. Whatever you think you need is probably not what you need. And it's moving so fast that none of us in this room or outside or analysts can really predict where it's all going. And there's a lot of really good technologies out there, and a lot of you probably use them. But the difference that makes the difference, in my view, isn't the technology, it's the strategy, it's the approach, and it's the mindset. So at Marsh, we had I'll kind of go through just a very brief situation summary. Marsh, had the second highest loss of life on 9/11. We had some trouble with the Attorney General of the state of New York. We had let go of 10,000 people. This is a 140-year-old company. Insurance brokers, you can imagine, are risk averse. Average age of the workforce was 48 years old. So there's an advantage to that in the fact that really smart, knowledgeable people, but also some of them approaching the end of their careers. And our stock price was, I think, a third of what it was a few years earlier. And we had gone through 2 or 3 CEO regime changes and a lot of expense management. And so all of our profitability, although our profitability tripled in a 3-year period, it was all through expense management. It wasn't revenue growth. So you can imagine as an employee, when your profitability triples through expense management and all the perks are gone and it's hard to find a stapler anymore or anything like that, when it used to be a very plush kind of great place to work in that regard, we had all these pressures to move the stock price and to innovate and to grow but we were coming out of this very kind of dark period. And so, the investor community expected to see revenue growth. Our stock had a bit of uptick due to, I think, the expense management, but they knew that there's a floor at which you get your expenses. Our competitors were also going through, there was quite a bit of, we kind of, 2 or 3 big main players, and they had gone through some of the same sort of expense management and the same things, and everyone, the insurance and insurance brokerage are kind of behind the times in innovation and a lot of different things. And so, so all of us are standing there, a little bit fat, dumb, and happy, but at the same time knowing that we don't know if it's our direct competitor or indirect competitors are going to come after us, but something has to change. So, and then we looked at macroeconomic trends, and you look at like risk, and you think about volcanic eruptions or unrest in Egypt or all these different things, different kinds of risk that we weren't necessarily used to handling or managing, but as the largest risk management company in the world, we got to and needed to. So the world is moving a lot faster, it's a lot more complex, it's a lot more dynamic, but yet our company was not keeping up with the paradigms or the shifts in how the commerce worked or what our clients needed. And so you looked at our biggest issue was revenue growth. So everyone was very good. We instilled expense management culture. Everyone was really, really good at counting the pennies. Everyone was extremely frugal. That message got through loud and clear. And everyone was actually, people were afraid to hire anyone. They were afraid to spend any money with a consultancy, which in general is mostly a good thing. But you need to be able to make the right investments. And so people were still kind of in the bunkers and like shell-shocked. If you looked at what really mattered in terms of our executive committee and what they were on the hook for to the board was net operating income. So we had to be really clear about what the metric was. So even though revenue is very, very important, we still had to manage the expenses because it was about the net operating income. And that was the metric that we always talked about. And the opportunities that we really saw that we could seize was becoming, rather than kind of a transactional product company, we'll do your workman's comp or your employee benefits or general liability, to be a much more of a solutions provider and a risk advisor. So really have the customer, full service, sell them multiple lines, greater share of wallet, advisory services, captives, consulting, et cetera, and have a really embedded relationship to be very, very difficult to disrupt, highly profitable, and at the end of the day, really solutions oriented for the client and help them manage their cost of capital better. So our CEO, who eventually got promoted to the CEO of the parent company, that was his job, was, okay, expenses are done, we got to grow. We got to innovate, which means getting all of these silos to work together, because we were organized like, I'm the workman's comp group, and that's what I do, and I've done it for 25 years, and the career path was like that. Employee benefits, I don't know, it's not my area, Brazil, I don't know, we're geographic P&Ls, I do the US, Istanbul, not me, so we had all of this. And then our chief human resources officer, her priorities were around employee engagement and culture building and morale, because according to all of our surveys and data, that was really kind of in the toilet. And yet you wanted people to go take risks and innovate and celebrate and have this sales culture. We need to move from, we were excellent farmers, we need to become hunters from a sales perspective. We could manage what we had, we couldn't go out for the kill and get more. So we had to move that, and to have that, yet that people feel comfortable and safe and supported. So that was the kind of what was important to her. And then to our CEO, again, it was the revenue and the really kind of being more of a solutions provider. So when we looked at what to do with social, it actually started from engagement and learning and development and kind of getting our mojo back. But a big part of the principles were that with such a experienced workforce, it made no sense to bring outside experts in, because we all had a lot of the expertise. We had 25,000 people, 400 offices, 100 countries, and geographic P&Ls, and so that wasn't, if someone was brilliant in the Seattle office, people in Seattle hopefully got that. People in Portland didn't necessarily get that, let alone someone in Singapore. And so it was like, how do we unlock and unleash that? And the goal was to flow all of this knowledge and effectiveness and morale and connectedness to each other. And as our CHRO said, it sounds kind of silly, but with 25,000 people, you kind of have to introduce your employees to each other. And if you think about your turnover rates as well, we had 10% voluntary turnover. So every year we have 10% new faces, right? So you think in a 5-year period of time, like half the company is turning over, right? So it's like, how do you constantly make sure that those people, because we're all talking about external networks and how do you network and do the LinkedIn thing and Twitter, meet up with people and create all these connections. We just needed to provide meaningful connections even internally. So we created a, and I'll get into more detail later, but the right governance and structure and teams, et cetera. We decided that we didn't really have any technology. We had an advantage. We weren't a SharePoint shop. We didn't have a lot of embedded things. We didn't have any big Oracle product or database or anything that we had to use. So we used a lot of kind of consumer-grade technology, and we actually leveraged working with some New York startups and some consumer IT sort of companies, and worked and kind of built our own platform and solution, which we're now migrating to another provider. But that was the right thing because the market wasn't where we needed to be 3-4 years ago. So, what we did, it was a very iterative, phased approach. It was kind of the anti-waterfall development IT sort of thing. When we did a PeopleSoft upgrade, it was like 3 years of blueprinting and da-da-da-da, and then like, bam, go live, right? And it was just this like cannon explosion. And hopefully what we figured out 3 years ago was right. This was very much, very incremental, very agile. We actually released every week technology updates, just like you go to Facebook or use your Instagram app or something else. It's always changing and evolving and getting better. That was sort of our mindset about things. But it allowed us from a change management perspective to not drop a Home Depot on people, but to kind of give them one tool at a time. So I'll talk more about change and the resource requirements, but I think one of the things that often gets left behind, what we'll talk about with you all, is the notion of, oftentimes like when you launch a website or you have an enterprise application, it could be your accounts payable system or something like that, you launch and deploy it and you're done, right? It's live, right? Then it goes into some IT sustainment mode on like a help desk or whatever else, and maybe eventually you'll update it. But there's not this notion of like, how do we like make this more powerful? Not even the technology side. Like sometimes it's just the mental bridge of like the use case about how it could actually be useful to someone, how to be consultative and those sorts of things. And this notion of it's like never done. And a lot, this is going to take a long time to, we talked all about change the first two presentations. Like, we've got some of our folks who are like ready for it, some of them are resistant, and some of them are just kind of blind and ignorant to it. And they're somewhere along the spectrum where they're like kind of really big cheerleaders over here. We had a few of those. So it's going to take time to move 25,000 people who, by the way, most of whom have never worked in a company with advanced enterprise technology. They didn't come from Salesforce.com, or they didn't come from companies like that. They've worked in our industry, which is, we're still doing paper. Everything's, you should see the files and things we have. It's just it's incredible. So, we dealing on that, not only the kind of community management side, how to gin up that energy, but also on the dealing with breakdowns. That's what we'll talk about, is that what's great about social is great things happen, and sometimes great things don't happen. Or sometimes things happen that don't seem like they're great. They're actually great, but it doesn't occur like it's great because it's new. So it occurs like a threat or a problem or something else, Like someone will question the CEO, and that seems like a very bad thing. And sometimes it'll seem even bad to the CEO, sometimes it'll seem good, and it's like, oop, pull the plug on the network. It's, you're like that close to like a complete, we're having the reactor meltdown here, shut down. But in fact, how do you create a framework and a mindset to deal with those sorts of things? Because at the end of the day, we're inviting 25,000 people to dance. How did you kind of, how did we create a mindset to do that? So that's a very, very quick bit about the Marsh story. And before we go into kind of our workshop mode, I wanted to give you what I thought about a lot the last 2 weeks about what have I seen in talking to many other companies and going to lots of conferences and benchmarking and reading, and from our own experiences, the pitfalls, because we've definitely made some mistakes at Marsh. And so these are what I think are, what I would say, the 10 pitfalls, and the workshop we'll go through actually addresses some of these so you can overcome them. But the first one is you don't really understand the business strategy. So many times I talk to people doing social things, and I'm like, well, what business are you in? What industry? What are the drivers of that industry? What's the strategy? How is your company going to win within your industry? Blank stare. Unfortunately, a lot of folks in different functions, including HR or IT or finance or compliance, don't really understand the business in which they're working in, because their expertise and technical skill is rooted in the function in which they work. And they might have come from another industry or something else. They don't really quite get how that's supposed to be. Or maybe the business isn't articulated that or shared that very clearly either, which is also something that happens, but that's a big pitfall, is not understanding the business strategy. Number 2, the initiative or the social engagement or whatever you're trying to do with social is not tied to critical business issues or metrics. So I said, net operating income was the thing that really, was what the CEO was on the hook for. Well, if you're going to do something, have it be the sort of thing that is going to benefit your CEO or your executive committee. And making sure that, for us, it was sales and revenue generation as well. So like having this not just be some we talked about pain versus pleasure in the behavioral economics, chart earlier. And I think Francois maybe mentioned that. And it's not about vitamins, it's about painkillers, right? So where is the pain, right? Where is the real urgent need? And that is where you're going to get much more traction on social versus some nice to have. Like, I'm trying to sell you on the fact that one, you need it, and two, it's a totally new behavior. Number 3, no executive sponsorship or ambassadors from the business. If your only executive sponsor is your CHRO or someone in a function that isn't the true power player at your company, maybe your CHRO is, right? Sometimes CHRO is like the right hand of the CEO. That can happen. It's less likely. But if it is, that's great. But who do you have in the business that's a real player or a real influencer that is all about this and totally sold and invested and considers this his or hers? That's key. If you don't have that, huge problem. Number 4, treating it like an IT project, not a human capital transformation. So if you take whatever skills you usually use to manage an IT project, like an ERP implementation or something, with your LMS or your P2P or whatever, your CRM, pick other acronyms, it's not going to be successful because that's about technology and it's not about people. And in fact, when that chart about being treated like children or adults, a lot of IT enterprise platforms are actually architected and designed to treat people like children. No, you can't see this, you can't do that, you have to have approvals for this. It's not designed like this kind of open, free space that generally social is generally designed to treat people like adults. So it's a completely different paradigm, so it's the wrong place to draw from. Number 5, you don't manage the detractors. You don't manage the folks because what people will do is they'll kind of ignore them or they'll avoid them versus either bring them in or engage them or figure out how to box them and bracket them somehow. And we'll talk about that. And so this could be your HR function, the other parts of your HR function that are less evolved. This could be your IT function or your compliance function or your legal function, or some folks that are a little bit more old school in their approach to how to manage people or the business. And so these are folks that eventually, if you're really good, you convert them to raving fans, and that's when everyone's sold. Because when you get Judy or Jose or someone like this that was a big naysayer, and they become a raving fan, everyone's in. So there's a huge opportunity to convert or flip them, but sometimes you just need to minimize and manage them. Number 6, you don't run it like a real business initiative. So many times I've seen projects in HR in particular, but also marketing, that aren't run like a new product brought to market, or a new service, or a client engagement, with the kind of professionalism, the rigor, the structure, the governance, the metrics, the reporting, the executive, involvement. And so, the simplest thing on that, like, bring numbers. When you go to when your COO comes to the meeting, or your CFO, what's interesting is they bring numbers, right? And then all of a sudden they're like taken very seriously, independent of what the numbers are or what it's about, because there's like certain rigor and seriousness. And it's like speaking the language of businesses, and it's a numbers thing, right? So bringing that and having that sort of rigor and professionalism and seriousness, people start to take it serious because they see you're managing it in a serious sort of way, versus this hobby, side of the desk sort of pet project sort of thing. No, this is a real business thing designed to move business results. Number 7, no real change management. Just roll out the communication. So oftentimes people confuse change management and communications. So they'll say, oh, we're going to do a rollout, and we are going to, we're going to let everyone know. We're going to send out an email to everyone. Now, if any of you have ever worked in email marketing or even use campaign management software within your own firms, you should measure your open rates and your click rates. It's pretty fascinating. Like a 20% open rate on an internal email is pretty good. You think about that, though, that means 4 out of 5 people did not read it. Now, that's just opening it. That doesn't even necessarily mean that I took action or clicked on a link or anything like that. Sometimes those rates are like 1 or 2%. So you want to think about, just communicating, or just, again, treating someone like a child doesn't work. Hey, we have this new platform, you should use it. It's charity for the firm. We want more of your time, more of your energy. You're already overworked doing a bunch of stupid things, and let's add this to the list. That's how it occurs for employees when you take that approach. Versus a very different approach of saying, hey, we know it frustrates you when you can't solve your client needs because you don't know who to talk to in Brazil or in Istanbul or in London. And we're finding a way that rather than some crazy spreadsheet and returning phone calls across time zones that takes weeks sometimes, of like a Rosetta Stone to find what you need in the company to make you really effective so you can meet your sales quota. That's a very different approach. And we know we probably don't have it right at the start, so we want to get your feedback along the way, and we will make changes, and we'll let you know what those are. quickly. I mean, that's a very different place to come from. Number 8, metrics and targets are not defined. Success is subjective. So like on the Kelly Services continuum there, you know, there's like a certain number of users or whatever, or posts. Is it good or bad? So, you know, we had 25,000 colleagues. We had one executive say, you know, 3 months in, well, dang it, why don't we have 25,000 blogs? And I was like, well, you have to realize not everyone's going to blog. You know, I used the dance floor analogy and said not everyone's going to break dance. You're going to have a lot of wallflowers, a couple people shaking their shoulders, and a few break dancers, you know. Bloggers are break dancers, you know. Lurkers are wallflowers, passive contributors are sort of in the middle. And I kind of broke down the 99-1 rule, and I have a video on my YouTube channel about that if you want to check that out. And it's, you know, we talked about expectation setting. So from the start, because we were managing like a real business project with rigor, we said, here's the metric, here's how we actually measure it, and here is the target. Because it's one thing to have a metric, right? So that, you know, great fuel economy is great, but to have a target is very, very different. So say, here's how many people we expect to sign up or to use it, et cetera. And so then the CEO would know whether it's going well or not. Now, mind you, he's never done social before, so we got to kind of negotiate those and make them up to a certain degree. But it was in a way that we all agreed beforehand what that looked like, and then it became, you know, much like science, right? Like we were testing, you know, what's working and what's not working, and it was very, very fact-based. Number 9, no community management. So we'll talk more about community management if you're not familiar with the term, but you know, it's a whole field of science about, you know, essentially being the host of the party, tendering the garden, and you know, how do you make things come alive, help, you know, build the relationships, how do you be the spatula for that bowl, right, and bring things together. And so oftentimes, again, it's just a rollout, and there's not that long-term community management, which is a seemingly highly inefficient way to do things. It's just highly effective. It really, really, really works. And so we'll talk more about that. And the last thing is having the technology be done once it's launched. You know, kind of a one and done, it's deployed, it's up. So much of the project plan is just built in this one, you know, diamond that says, you know, launch in the project plan, and it's the technology, and then it's like boom, and the assumption is it's going to work, and it's going to be what people need, and that's it.